Fate. Souls and Singularities by Mundatorem Chapter 91-92. Chapter 91. Nero Fest. Ending and Epilogue. Nero Fest. Ending and Epilogue. And for the winners. Nero raised the golden chalice into the air, while purposefully avoiding the stares of the losing team, all of whom, with the exception of Heracles and Artemis, were covered in burns, with Nameless's entire right side looking as though he had fallen into a fire pit. Not that the war god looks off-put, but his physical display, or even that he registered the damage. If anything, he looked more irritated that he had been taken out in a blindsided attack from an individual he hadn't even been able to fight once. The Holy Grail grand prize, she continued on, turning towards Ritska and the others and walking towards them. The Chaldeans, however, had their attention firmly away from Nero and onto Castor instead, with scrutinizing expressions. Castor had his hand raised, covering his face and hiding them away from his sight as he looked towards Sasaki, pissed. Sasaki looked at him, raising an amused eyebrow at the display as Castor looked rather nervous by the attention. Is something the matter? Are they still staring? Castor asked in a quiet whisper, not trusting himself to turn around and face them. Sasaki let out a mirthful hum and peered past the Castor towards the Chaldean group. Sure enough, they were still staring at the man. Surprisingly, they had also brought up the screens for Romani and Da Vinci as well. The former looked utterly baffled while the latter looked close to laughing. They are still staring, Sasaki affirmed to the man, taking a small sense of enjoyment as he watched the anxious expression seemingly intensify as a result. Castor now turned his body so that his back was to the observers. Tell me when they aren't looking anymore. Stage fright? Sasaki asked, leaning towards the man slightly and studying his expression. Castor winced and let out a nervous chuckle. Not exactly, but I've never been on the receiving end of such looks before. He whispered back, I don't know what I did. You mean aside from the obvious? Those are appraising stares though? Castor blurted out in a panic. They're looking at me like I'm some sort of dangerous criminal. Sasaki raised an eyebrow at him, then looked back at Ritska. Say, master, he called out to the young man, has Castor done something to earn such suspicious looks? Huh? Ritska jolted slightly. Oh, no, it's just that he looks like someone else. He explained, then looked back at Castor. It's actually uncanny. Really? Sasaki raised an eyebrow. Who? He looks like Solomon. Hey, Castor turned around. That's my nom. Wait, Solomon? He then paused and blinked, his face soon scrunching up. Really, Solomon? Yes, Ritska nodded his head. And you are? Solomon. This is some sort of cosmic joke. Romani's head fell into his hands, the man groaning loudly as he did so. I can just feel it. Cosmic jokes aside, Da Vinci interrupted while rolling her eyes in clear amusement. I suppose we have determined that the counterpart of Solomon does exist, if only in some form. She cupped her chin and narrowed her eyes inquisitively at the man. Just to clarify, you are Solomon, the king of pyromancy? Solomon looked like he'd been punched in the face. King of pyromancy? Who would even call me that? He squawked in surprise, waving his arms around. I'm not even a king. Master of pyromancy I could accept, but king? The Great Swamp isn't even a kingdom? It was technically an autonomous region. Nameless suddenly spoke up, giving the Castor a side-eyed glance. While it had no official ruler, you were the highest authority at the time as the effective founder of the pyromancy arts. He shrugged. In some way you could be considered the king of pyromancy in much the same way in that I was king of Archdragon Peak, if only by being the highest authority of the land. He turned back and noticed the stares before scoffing. I might have sequestered myself from the rest of the world, but that did not make me ignorant as to the affairs of the land. There is also the case of flame sorcery being an art that only Izalith and her daughters knew of. To hear mortals wielding it was something rather surprising for me. Oh, we can't wield flame sorcery. Solomon explained, shaking his head. My mentor said that it was an art only those birthed through life's soul could obtain, which made it a magic of the gods. Pyromancy is what we mortals can wield instead. He paused and shrugged. It's not as powerful but still very useful. So it's like the difference between magecraft and magic. Mash clarified, furrowing her brows. Romani nodded his head behind her. That sounds like a similar enough example, although even then pyromancy would still fall under the category of an Age of Gods magic, but it appears to be the closest to magecraft of a sort. He furrowed his brow. And you taught it? I only managed to do so much because of Mentor. Salomon hastily explained, waving his hand in dismissal. She technically invented pyromancy but had never taken a pupil, so, well, he gave a slight chuckle and a shrug. I could be called the first proper pyromancer, and then I went to the Great Swamp and started to teach the art to the others. It sort of took off from there. Not entirely dissimilar to Solomon. Da Vinci muttered. I don't suppose you have a link with demons, do you? Demons? Romani sputtered. Really, Leo? You're just going to. Oh, yeah. Salomon nodded, earning a blink from everyone. Well, I don't know if you'd call it a link, per se. He added on, but my mentor lived on the outskirts of Lost Ezelith, so I occasionally encountered a demon living there. And you survived? Nameless asked, looking down at the man with a raised eyebrow. Oh, I just talked with them. He shrugged in response. Once you find some common ground, they really are quite interesting, people. He guessed, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. I mean, they are very violent with most other races, but they thought me using fire was sort of novel. He paused, cupping his chin. How did Mentor put it? Aha. He grinned, snapping his fingers. She said to them it was a human watching a dog walk on its hind legs. Salomon remained smiling for a few moments before the expression gradually disappeared. Ah, right. I see the problem with the analogy now. He muttered. Well, some were friendly enough, I suppose. ... That's just depressing. Romani blurted out. You make it sound like you were a dolphin doing tricks at a zoo. A what doing tricks at a where? Salomon tilted his head in confusion, then stared at Romani blankly for a few moments before his lips pursed and he walked over to the screen, his right hand moving to cup his chin in thought. What? Romani leaned back in his chair slightly as Salomon approached. The caster's eyes then narrowed slightly before he gave a single hum. Yeah, he sniffed, then smiled. I'm Salomon. Nice to meet you. Oh, you were just saying hello. Romani let out a sigh of relief before shaking his head. I'm Dr. Romani Archaman, but you can just call me Roman if you want. He suddenly gave a proud smile and turned to his left. See? Another servant who doesn't insult me to my face. Maybe my luck is looking up. I wouldn't bet on that. Da Vinci sang back, causing Romani to slump in his chair. So, strange coincidences aside, I think it best that we get our prize and get out of here before the director decides to blow up. Aha! Nero gave a jolt as she realized the conversation had moved back to its original topic. She then turned towards Olga, who was glaring at the group and tapping her foot on the ground with clear impatience, her eyes moving from person to person before they fell upon the Grail in the Emperor's hands. Here you go, Pale Rose. Nero beamed, handing the Grail over to the director and causing the woman to, once again, grimace at the nickname before she dismissed it with an exasperated sigh. See, aren't I just the best? I am, aren't I? She looked around and beamed at Cecilia. You think so too, right? Thou art most generous. Cecilia replied cordially, her lips curving into a faint smile which earned her a giggle from the Emperor. Oh, you are too kind with your words. She waved her hand and puffed out her chest with pride. Feel free to continue praising me. For cheating. Leonidas suddenly spoke up, the man with his arms crossed and his voice very clearly containing some measure of irritation. The mighty Heracles was going to win that match, and we all know it. Really? Ash raised an eyebrow at the Lancer. Lord Ferrum had already proven to be the more skilled fighter, and his use of miracles allows him to harm the Berserker. He pointed out, I am confident he could claim victory. Bah! Leonidas scoffed. Heracles exists because he can do the impossible. Something like a war god is no match for him. He turned and pointed towards Ash. He even bested the dragon mount. I believe it is a storm drake rather than a true archdragon. Ash argued. The difference between the two is rather significant. That does not lessen Heracles' achievement by throwing the beast, Leonidas barked out. And Heracles was clearly the stronger of the two fighters. Being a stronger fighter does not necessarily mean that you are the better fighter. Ash responded. Many of the foes I bested were physically stronger than me. That does not mean I did not eventually beat them. That is impressive, but strength and spirit play a great factor in battles, and Heracles has both in abundance. Yes, but the group watched the two servants argue in complete silence. Eventually Nameless looked towards the individual in question. Heracles also stood with his arms crossed and staring down at the saber and lancer as they argued before he eventually felt the stare and looked towards Nameless. The two shared a single moment of understanding before Nameless spoke out. Ornstein used to do this a lot. Heracles grunted in response, making a series of growls which could be misconstrued as garbled words or perhaps rumblings of some wild animal. Nameless managed to infer that the berserker had experience with a similar sort of person, therefore he was used to it. The arguing duo went virtually ignored by everyone else as the director took the Holy Grail from Nero's possession, shakily giving it a once-over before nodding to herself and handing it over to Mash. Confirmed Grail retrieval, Senpei. Mash informed Ritsuka as she held the Grail tight to her chest and turned to the master, awaiting Rayshift back to Chaldea. I'll say, Ritsuka sighed, shaking his head and looking towards the director before he thinned his lips. So how was it? How was what? Olga looked at him with a raised eyebrow before releasing a scoff and gesturing to their surroundings, this colossal waste of time, resources and energy. Her shoulders slumped. How am I supposed to put this down in a report? She asked herself dejectedly. They're all going to think I'm an idiot. I mean, Ritsuka gave a shrug, you could omit certain details. Omit. Yeah, exaggerate some other parts. He went on, we arrived at a miniature singularity only to determine it was inhabited by multiple servants. Retrieval of the Grail required careful navigation to avoid a frontal assault which we were unprepared for. He smiled at her, placing his hands on his hips. That's better, right? Olga's eye twitched, however Da Vinci spoke before she could respond to that. That is actually a pretty good way of putting it down. The genius chuckled to herself, leaning forwards and smiling conspiratorially, and not incorrect either. A lot of the servants here were very powerful and aren't a part of Chaldea's roster. Her eyes shifted onto the director. Also, you can't say this was a wasted voyage. We did encounter multiple powerful servants who might prove helpful if they were ever summoned. She pointed across the screens to Romani and Salomon, who were both still talking with each other with relaxed expressions on their faces, and then smiled a little wider, a powerful founder of an entire branch of magecraft and a friend for Roman. Leo. Romani overheard her, turning and whining, don't phrase it like that. You make me sound like some sort of lonely pet. Stop fooling around and just get us back to Chaldea. Olga sighed, waving her hand dismissively at the doctor. All right, Romani raised his hands in surrender. Good news is we managed to get some of the footage of those fights and a lot of the readings for the Saint graphs of the potential future servants. He remarked as he rolled his chair towards the desk. I think we missed one or two, but in case we do encounter them again, we should be able to pull up those readings and keep you informed. I suppose that is at least useful. Olga grunted, crossing her arms and looking away. Sometime today would be nice. I mean, it's a complicated process. Romani explained as he tapped away at his computer, and we're a little short-staffed. He sighed, then looked to Da Vinci. Did you have to send Pharaohs down as well? She's looking to be a better Rayshift operator than some of the people we have here. Da Vinci paused, slowly turning and giving Romani a flat look. You mean to keep my rival stuck behind a desk where she can't do anything? No. Good. She beamed, because that trick with the speakers proved that it could be a devastating attack. I pity the one on the receiving end of it. Everyone shivered in memory of the singing of Elizabeth. I don't think I was there for that. Salomon remarked, looking around. Was it bad? Not for the dragons. Nameless groaned out, cupping his forehead and shaking his head in exasperation. However, none of us are dragons. Ah, I see the problem. Salomon nodded his head in understanding before clapping his hands together. So, I guess this is goodbye then. I mean, until we see you again. Ritsuka replied, then extended a hand towards the caster. Thanks for the help, by the way. Ah, my pleasure. Salomon smiled, clasping Ritsuka's hand in his own in a firm handshake. Always happy to help. although you're still looking a little jumpy around me. He gave a nervous chuckle. I didn't do anything, did I? Nothing you did. Artisuka hastily assured him. It's just that your, doppelganger is behind the incineration of humanity. He explained, frowning, so it's a little jarring. Salomon gave a single blink. Oh. Yeah. Ritsuka sniffed, pulling his hand back, but you seem an alright sort of guy. He smiled at Castor, so that's nice. Gee, glad you think so. He pursed his lips. So, the me from this world is. It's not exactly you per se. Da Vinci clarified, it's likely a case of similar name and same face rather than being an exact copy. She assured him, don't worry, whatever physical similarities you two have, I think I can confidently say that you are entirely different people. Pausing, she nodded towards Ash and Cecilia. In fact, Firekeeper Cecilia looks identical to Nero and King Arthur, and apparently Ash looks the same as Sir Gawain of the Round Table. Oh, Salomon let out a sigh of relief, so we just look the same as all. Most likely. Da Vinci chuckled, you shouldn't worry about it too much. Right, thanks Ms. All right then, Romani called out, turning back towards the screen. Everything is set up for you to return. I'm not sure how the servants are going to get back though. I shall handle that. Nero jumped into the conversation, giving a proud smile. Worry not, I invited them into Rome and I can help them leave just as easily. Quote. So are you going to explain how or just get us back, Romani? Olga snapped at him. The man jolted and swiftly pressed several buttons on his keyboard. The group soon started to glow with an ethereal tinge of gold as their bodies turned transparent. Ritsuka stared down at his hand before looking towards Nero and smiling at her. Thanks for inviting us, Nero. He bowed his head slightly. Despite what happened, I think it was a lot of fun. Nero gave her largest grin. Next, worry not. The next one shall be even better. Next one, Olga parroted, suddenly looking more concerned than anything else. What do you mean next on? She vanished before she could finish her sentence, leaving behind the remaining servants along with the emperor. Quote. I wonder if that will prove to be an issue later. Nero muttered to herself as she cupped her chin. Salomon was staring at the spot where she had vanished before looking towards the emperor. I wouldn't worry about it. She reminds me a bit of my mentor. She also showed her appreciation through insults. He gave her a reassuring smile. It was only when she got quiet could you tell she was really angry. Nero nodded her head. Then she is just shy about showing her true feelings. She giggled. How amusing. I confess confusion about this. Cecilia spoke up, tilting her head. She dislikes revealing her true intentions. For what reason? Salomon blinked slowly before he looked up at Nameless and Heracles. The two remained silent before they shrugged their shoulders. I don't understand women. Nameless admitted. I rarely interacted with them at all outside of my own family or the occasional high-ranking warrior. He paused, cupping his chin. Well, there was Isolith, but she was, he paused, noticing the stare from Salomon. Quote. That doesn't matter. He coughed into his hand, looking away from the caster. Isolith, that was my mentor's mother. Salomon remarked, scratching his nose, although Quelana never talked much about her family. He grimaced, not that I blame her for not discussing it. Quote. I suppose you wouldn't. Nameless nodded his head, then looked down and noticed his feet turning golden and vanishing. It appears without the Grail there is nothing to keep us here. Still, it was a decent enough time. A first for me. Salomon shivered. I didn't fight all that much. Really? Nameless gave him a raised eyebrow. That just makes Flan's defeat all the more embarrassing. He paused, then frowned behind his scarf. That said, he was never trained by Isolith or any of her daughters, so it is expected he wouldn't be all that skilled with fire. Still rather weird though. Ritsuka continued on as Da Vinci placed the Grail within the container. I thought only Solomon could make the Grails. No, Solomon would certainly have a much easier time making Holy Grails, but he isn't the only one who could. The genius explained as she turned to Ritsuka with a casual smile and assuming teaching pose with one hand on her hip and the other raised, seemingly pulling glasses from out of nowhere and putting them on. A Holy Grail itself, rather than the cup which held the blood of Christ, can be thought of instead as a battery which can be used to grant the wishes of its wielder. A. Battery. C. Da Vinci nodded. The Holy Grail is nothing more than a solidified form of pure magical energy which requires outside interference to use. The formation of new Holy Grails is certainly possible as singularities in history cause large-scale distortions which eventually lead to the birth of a Holy Grail due to the excessive amount of magical energy. So, we could end up with more Holy Grails. Ritska guessed. Da Vinci let out a hum before she slowly nodded her head. It is possible. We could have the formation of more minor singularities which lead to the forming of additional Holy Grails, but they aren't in the same league as the like Solomon made. She paused, frowning in thought for a few moments. Think of them as cheap disposable copies. She smiled. They get made, get used, and then that's that. So, can we do anything with them? Now you're thinking like a genius. Da Vinci cooed, patting him on the head and causing Ritska to swat the hand away while giving the woman an amused huff. But as for what we can do with them, for the moment, not a lot. She looked back towards the Grail. Right now we're just using them to keep Chaldea's generators running, so that's the best use for them at the moment. Ah, right. Ritska nodded his head, then looked towards the desk and saw the divine basin still present. And what about that? The Lord Vessel. She smiled. That's a little different. From what I've been informed of, it was able to grant its wielder transportation between summoning sites with relative ease. I'm hoping that combined with the summoning stones we might be able to further improve our secondary summoning system. The one with the crystals, right? Ritska nodded. Although Sigward was only able to come down for a few minutes, wasn't he? Well, it's only a prototype. Da Vinci explained, that and I'm making a summoning system from scratch. Try and give me a little more praise. Yes, yes. Ritska gave her a smile as he rolled his eyes. You're our universal genius. Da Vinci puffed out her chest and grinned, and don't you forget it. Her smile lightened. That being said, how is everyone? I think the director has actually been trying to chase down Nero. Ritska replied, earning a giggle from the genius. Yeah. Something about her plans for a Nero Fest 2, or along those lines. I hope I can get tickets. Da Vinci pouted. All that hard work and I was never even invited to go down. Didn't you tune in via the communication screens? Ritska asked, leaning back and crossing his arms while raising an eyebrow. Da Vinci sighed. There's a difference between watching something on a screen and actually being there. She pouted. I'm also a little jealous that all these other servants get to go out and do all sorts of adventures and I'm left behind. She sniffled. I'll feel lonely. What are you, a cat? Ritska gave an amused smile at her antics. Anyway, I was just letting you know that I was going to head down to the summoning chamber again. Figured I'd try my luck to see if we can get some more servants to help out. Okay. Da Vinci sang before leveling a finger towards him, but don't tire yourself out with too many summonings. I know. Ritska waved his hand to her as he walked towards the exit of her room. Oh, how is our resident undead friend? She asked before he crossed the door. Ritska paused and looked back at Da Vinci in surprise. Ash. She nodded her head. There seemed to be some issues he had with one of the servants there. Yeah, I think his name was Bedrick. Ritska furrowed his brow. Oscar mentioned him. I think that was where he got them. He pointed towards the Lord Vessel, Holy Basin. Da Vinci nodded. I was just wondering, is all. You mentioned trying to find him a hobby. Oh, right. Ritska nodded his head. I did, didn't I? He paused, then furrowed his brows. What do you think he'd even do? The genius shrugged. I'm not sure. He doesn't seem to have much in the way of interests. You could ask what he used to do in his spare time, but I doubt you'd get much of an answer. Yeah, Ritska nodded, furrowing his brows. Maybe we'll hold a movie night or something. He offered. I know that MASH definitely needs some experience with media. Da Vinci chuckled. I think we could work the simulator into something. Although the director might be a bit iffy on the topic of using Chaldean technology for a movie theater, she paused for a few moments before she carried on. That said, we would have surround sound and high definition beyond any current theater, so I am personally all for a movie night. Ritska laughed at the genius. I figured. I'll ask around and see if any of the servants would want to join in. Good luck, Viaggiator Ribel. Da Vinci waved to him in parting as he closed the door behind him. The genius was still chuckling to herself before she paused and cupped her chin in thought. I wonder. Summoning system is all booted up. Romani spoke through the intercom behind the master. Whenever you're ready, Fujimaru-kun. All right. Ritsuka nodded his head, then looked over his shoulder towards the glass. Oh yeah, I was thinking of holding a movie night or something in the future. Do you wanna come? Romani blinked. I appreciate the thought, but there's too much work for me to do to try and take time out of my schedule. He gave the master a grateful smile. Although it's a nice offer for you to make. Pausing, he gave the master an intrigued look. Although how would you get it past the director? I was going to invite her too. Ritsuka replied with an earnest expression. Do you think that would work? He directed the question towards Mash, who stood by his side in surprise. I'm not sure, senpai. Mash frowned slightly. I don't think the director would appreciate it if it was during the day, perhaps in the hours before everyone goes to sleep. She offered, tilting her head, but I don't know if the director would agree to go even then. Well, we won't know until we try. Ritsuka affirmed to himself and turned towards the summoning panel. If I might ask a question. Ash spoke up from behind him, his arms crossed and leaning against the doorway. What is a movie? Ritsuka blinked and turned around to face the saber before he winced. Ah, right, moving picture. Ash continued to stare at him blankly. What about a play? Have you ever heard of a play? A play. Ash tilted his head, furrowing his brows. Quote. Looks like you have your work cut out for you, Fujimaru-kun. Romani gave an awkward chuckle as he stared in the direction of the saber through the glass. Forget the director, I'm not even sure how Ash would respond to a film. Film. Quote. Never mind. Ritsuka sighed, shaking his head. I'll explain it later for you. He turned back to the summoning pillar and placed his hand upon the pedestal in front of it. Better get to it then. He uttered out the summoning chant, soon followed by a pillar of light rising into the air. The light died down to reveal the newest figure. The overly colorful features of the man and mischievous smile instantly caused Ritsuka to let out a sigh. Hey, Mozart. A rather disingenuous greeting. Mozart rolled his eyes good-naturedly as he stepped down from the panel, also lacking in a bit of flair, but I suppose we are acquaintances of a sort, aren't we? He chuckled as he approached. I suppose I don't need to explain that I'm quite useless when it comes to battles. Nice try. Ritsuka chuckled. Marie already told us how you were able to weaken Ferrum in France. Mozart's eye twitched and his smile turned strained. Did she now? He sighed, shaking his head. I suppose there goes my plan of just sitting back and letting all the other servants do all the heavy lifting. He paused as he comprehended the sentence. Ah, so Maria is here, is she? His smile became much more genuine. That's wonderful. She's not been making too much trouble, has she? She's getting along well enough with the others. Ritsuka replied, then paused. I think she's made friends with Verndari and Gareth. He explained before he added on. Oh, and Diane is with her as well. Well, that's to be expected. Mozart casually replied. They are virtually a package deal. I also think the only person our dear Chevalier dislikes more than me is Sanson. He chuckled. Still, it's funny to tease them. All right then. Ritsuka looked back at the panel. Just another summoning to go then. The pillar of light once again shot upwards, soon dying down to reveal a girl with twin horns atop her head, violet-colored hair, bright blue eyes and a frilly black and white dress. Hello my little piglets. Elizabeth cheered out as she smiled. You couldn't get enough of my performance and decided to summon. Goodness me, look at the time. Mozart hurriedly exclaimed as he rushed out of the room, virtually sprinting down the hallway as fast as his legs could carry him. Elizabeth frowned at the sudden interruption and then looked down at Ritsuka. Mash and Ash, well, that was rude, she remarked before she smiled, although maybe he was just nervous about being in the presence of such a great idol. Perhaps he cannot stand the sight of bats. Elizabeth's cheery expression died at the voice, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the newest arrival at the door. Kiyohime gave a pleasant smile as she flashed out her fan and batted it a few times in front of her face. I could sense the arrival of a perverted individual with foolish aspirations. she brutally remarked with her expression still cordial. Pervert. Elizabeth bristled. That's some bold words coming from a stalker like yourself. She stabbed a finger towards her, then pointed at Ritsuka. I bet you've already got this little squirrel frightened half to death with your creepy routine. I have not. Kiyohime barked out. Master Sama is very accepting of my nature and understands I am just looking out for his best interests. She smiled thinly, especially when in regards to such peculiar individuals like yourself. Like myself. Elizabeth let out a dismissive scoff. How about like yourself? Little Miss Belly Dragging, I'll break into your room at night. That is simply me showing my affection for Master Sama. Kiyohime explained. Nothing about that is horrible in the least. Yeah, right. So welcome to Chaldea. Ritsuka cut in, walking in between the two dragon-kind servants with a strained expression on his face. Glad you could come and I hope to give you a tour of the base. Elizabeth blinked and looked down at Ritsuka before she let out a sigh. All right then, I suppose I will have to settle differences with the little snake later. She sent a faint glare in the direction of Kiyohime before looking back at Ritsuka. Do you happen to have a place where I would be able to practice my singing talents? She asked with a gleam in her eyes. Ritsuka blinked slowly, then gave a nervous chuckle. We. Elizabeth leaned closer with wide eyes that made it impossible to even consider lying to her. The simulator can be redesigned for servant specifications. He got out through a strained smile. I'm sure you can practice there, by yourself without being disturbed. Excellent. Elizabeth beamed, skipping past him and glaring at Kiyohime once again. Well, piglets. Aren't you going to show me where it is? She turned around to face them, giving an impatient frown and tapping her foot against the ground. Ash stared at her in silence, then looked towards Ritsuka and raised an eyebrow. Is this wise? Don't ask me that. Ritsuka sighed as he walked towards the idle girl. He gave Ash a tired look out of the corner of his eye as he passed the saber. I'm not going to like the answer. Ash merely hummed in response as he followed the master out of the room. Epilogue. The two figures trudged through the streets as they approached their destination. Walking side by side they made the rather imposing pair. Both wore thick plate armor while one was a golden shine, the other was a dull silver with blue wrapped around their neck and shoulder. The two eventually came to a stop at the entrance to one of the streets, then watched as the figures slowly started to vanish into golden motes of light one by one. The pair remained silent before the one on the right turned to the one on the left, his expression hidden behind his molded helmet, although the aura of irritation was clearly felt by his counterpart. We're late. He flatly spoke, earning a sigh from his companion. What was with all that, I know where we're going nonsense you were speaking of? Crossing his arms, he proceeded to let out a scoff and shake his head. We spent virtually our entire summoning wandering around the woodlands around this city. You can't say it wasn't worthwhile. His companion responded, offering a faint shrug. We were at least able to deal with the stray beasts in the woods. Ah yes, the beasts which lasted all of 2 seconds. The golden armored man grunted out, raising his hand and clasping the front of his helmet in exasperation. Clearly our skills were tested to their limits. All I was saying is that we were at least able to have some manner of enjoyment out of our situation. The Blue Knight replied with a light-hearted voice, although I will not deny that perhaps there was some issue with my directional senses. You led us in completely the wrong direction. The golden armored knight cut him off. How did you even manage to get anything done on your ventures out of the city? He paused as if realizing something. Was that the reason you got that wolf? No. The knight quickly replied. They were just, I felt as though a companion for long journeys would be useful, and the tracking abilities of great wolves is legendary, almost as much as their intellect. And so you decided to get one and teach it to swing a sword. The Golden Knight sighed. Fine, but did you get the wolf to deal with your terrible sense of direction? My sense of direction is perfectly adequate. The Blue Knight hotly defended. I just felt it better to get a companion who could speed up the process. Nothing more than that. HMPH. The Golden Knight let out a scoff, shaking their head in exasperation at his companion before he looked down at his own feet. Well, we're late and everyone else is leaving, meaning that we are not long for this world either. I know. The Blue Knight reached up and scratched the bridge of his nose. it's my bad, but realistically, this is hardly likely to be our only opportunity to fight. It might have been mine. The pair of knights turned towards the voice, a tall man with a long braided white beard in silver armor and adorned with blue fabric. Upon his back rested a large ethereal lion-like creature in a transparent white color. Many foes appeared strong enough to bring the light to my eyes, although it appears I was denied the chance to combat against them. That is unfortunate. The Blue Knight lamented. You have the stature of a strong warrior, perhaps on par with the Lordkin. He paused, cupping his chin. You are human, are you not? That I am. The elderly man nodded, staring at the pair. I sense upon thee the grace of gold, yet it is not like that which I know of. Perhaps thou art of the race of Empyreans. He muttered, then shook his head. No, 'tis not as great as Marika's. The pair of knights remained silent before the Blue Knight leaned towards the Golden Knight. Do you know of what he speaks? Perhaps he refers to the gods. The Golden Knight whispered back before the pair straightened themselves out. Still, you were spurned from combat. 'Tis not the first time I have been spurned. The elderly man, I shall endure, yet after seeing such proud warriors I cannot help but be saddened that I had not the opportunity to test their strength for myself. The Blue Knight looked down at his feet, watching as they already started to fade away into light before he flexed his body, solidifying himself once again and looking back at the man. This distortion of time has perhaps a few minutes left in it. Perhaps. The elderly man nodded, then narrowed his eyes slightly as he watched the Blue Knight slowly pull a large black sword from a scabbard on his back. While we may not have the time for a full battle, the Blue Knight spoke in a cordial tone, perhaps a single spar, while we have the time left. The Golden Knight sighed loudly and shook his head, always with the need for spars with you. Never one to miss the opportunity to demonstrate his skill with a blade. If it is a battle thee offers, the elderly man allowed a ghost of a smile to touch upon his lips as a large double-sided war axe manifested in his hands, the lion on his back growling loudly. Then I shall oblige thy wish, and thank thee for thy courtesy. Think nothing of it. The Blue Knight chuckled as he assumed an offensive pose, merely the request of a knight wishing to test his strength against a strong foe. That is a challenge I can agree with. The elderly man stomped upon the ground, causing the earth to rumble as he hefted the axe with both hands. I shall face thee as befits a crown. I shall face thee as befits a knight. The pair remained stationary before launching towards each other. Hey, Ash. You think we might be missing something really cool? Cool. Ash frowned at the odd choice of words. What do you mean? He looked out the window and frowned. It is rather cool outside, is it not? Ritska sighed, shaking his head. Figure of speech, Ash, figure of speech. Ah, I see. Ash nodded. My mistake then. Hurry up, piglets. Elizabeth's voice called out from ahead of them with clear impatience. I need to test out my new venue to make sure it's up to my standards. Ash, do you think it's possible for bad music to kill someone? Ritska suddenly asked as he looked up at the saber. Because I do. You believe she is planning to kill you? Ash blinked, then frowned and cupped his chin. Yes, her poor skill during the Bazaar festival would point towards her voice being her weapon. A joke, Ash. Ritska sighed. It was a joke. Ah, most humor still escapes me. Ash admitted, I have been trying, but I fear it still lies beyond my ability to fully replicate. Keep working on it. And ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Once again, Elden Ring will not be included in this FIC in any meaningful way because it's a Dark Souls FIC. There might be nods to other FromSoft games, but it's still a Dark Souls FIC. That being said, we have confirmation on Salomon as the caster. So, here are his stats. Salomon, King of Pyromances. Servant, Caster. Strength, E. Endurance, E. Agility, B. Mana, A+. Luck, A++. Noble Phantasm, A+, A++. Magnus Ignis Sphera, A+. Anti-Fortes Max Target, 800, Max Range, 1-70. The nickname most attributed to him, Great Fireball. His power as a pyromancer, creating this spell which was mimicked by his students with lesser effect. He can build up tremendous head and contain it within a ball of fire, which he was then deploy upon his enemies in an explosion powerful enough to destroy a small castle. The moment of ignition is here. I am the one who grasps for the fire of life. Let these flames reduce you to ash. Magnus Ignis Sphera. The Great Swamp. A++ bounded field max target. 100, max range. 1 to 20. The Great Swamp where his legend truly began. This place is so vital to him that he can manifest it around himself. The truth of the matter is that it is his workshop. His domain and the one place he can truly feel at home. Within this bounded field, he can control the environment and generate pyromancies at will with minimal effort. However, it will take considerable time for him to create the bounded field in question, and if he is interrupted or the field is destroyed by a sufficiently powerful NP, then he will be weakened as a result. Class skills. Territory creation. A. Item construction. C. High-speed casting. B. His ability to cast pyromancies far exceeds others. Able to create complex spells in moments what would usually take longer. Personal skills. King of Pyromancers, a +++. While he was a student of Quelana, he was still the founder of the widespread school of pyromancy which touched upon the entire world. He was her only pupil whom she gifted the art of flames to. He is, in effect, the master of flames themselves. A complete grasp of all pyromancy. Past, present and future. Even magecraft which has been built upon in the other world, as long as its roots are based in flames, can be understood by him. Bumbling Fool, a ++. Perhaps the greatest surprise of all, the man dubbed the King of Pyromancers and founder of nearly the entire magic school is actually an idiot. Or a clumsy oaf in any capacity, however his luck is affected because of this. A brilliant man who made a legend of himself, his luck is permanently raised because of this. In times of extreme danger, he might just receive the flash of inspiration needed to claim victory. Or he might fall flat on his face at just the right moment to avoid losing his head. Whichever comes first. Adoration of flames. A. Highly resistant to all flames. Anything below the rank of C cannot harm him. B is negated by 50%. A is negated by 30%. Grasp of life, B+. Pyromancy is, at the end of the day, the art of life. The flame brought disparity, and thus, the study of the flame is the study of life itself. That is the true nature of pyromancy and all that relates to it. Salomon is naturally at home in rural environments or areas with a more natural setting. Communion with demons. A. His life in Lost Izalith, even on the outskirts, managed to have him frequently encounter demons. However, he was able to commune with the demon kin with help from Quelana and as such has the ability to speak the language of the race. It is not the art of invoking nor evoking demons to his will, he can simply commune and achieve common ground with them if they desire it. Summoning. Oh, right, I'm Salomon, caster class servant. Here to help PWFT. I bit my tongue. Dialogue 1. Hey, so what do you actually do for your free time around here? Well, the Great Swamp was mostly where you would study and such to perfect your pyromancy. That sort of thing. Dialogue 2. I actually prefer more natural areas. You know, like woodlands and all that. Your simulator is very close but it's not quite the same. Dialogue 3. Master and servant. Well, I'm actually used to being both, you know. Well, master and pupil technically. Still, I just do what you say, right? It was the exact same for Quelana too. Dialogue 4. If summoned before Temple of Time. I'm going to go meet up with Roman. Me and him talked about a binge session of Magi Ma'am. We're obviously going to be working very hard. And no need to tell Da Vinci about it. Honestly. Dialogue 5. If you have Carmina. Hey, Carmina. It's me. I knew you'd remember me. Look how big you've gotten. When you were learning pyromancy from me you were about this tall and Say another word and I'll burn your hide. Why? It's not that embarrassing, is it? I heard you did very well with pyromancy. Dialogue 6. If you have Quelaag. One of the Chaos Witches. The oldest of them. Right, that makes sense I guess. Still, she seems very nice, doesn't she? Well, not like I'd say that to her face. She's also very mean, you know. Dialogue 7. If you have David. There's this one servant, apparently I look like his son. That's a little strange, we even share a similar enough name too. Although this guy looks nothing like my father. Dialogue 8. If you have Lady Avalon. Wait. Magi Mar I mean, who is this woman who I have never met before in my life? Ha 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 ha, your big brother. Ah, he did it again, didn't he? Dialogue 9. If you have Quaylana. Quaylana. It's me, Salomon. That's mean, mentor. I'm not a little nuisance, I happen to be quite the big deal now, you know. Some apparently call me a king now. Stop pinching my ear. I'm not getting a big head, I swear. Yes, you're a very good mentor and I was lucky to have you. Dialogue 10. If you have Castor of Midrash. Ah, I look like your husband. Sorry. Really, my condolences for your loss Mrs. I'm not him. Dialogue 11. If you have Saint Elizabeth. Ah, Master. Beth and I just wanted to thank you for helping to convert one of the storage rooms into an indoor garden. Pass my thanks on to Da Vinci as well for helping to set everything up, we really appreciate it and you're welcome to stop by any time. Dialogue 12. After completing Temple of Time if summoned before. Oh, I'm just off to Roman's room, making sure everything is clean and in order, you know. Don't want to let dust coat everything, do we? Likes. What do I like? Well, I actually like peaceful walks through the great outdoors. Hates. I don't want to be a burden but it's actually places like Chaldea that I hate, it's much too artificial. Everything is so clean and it just makes me feel a little out of place. It's not what I'm used to. Wish for the Holy Grail. A wish. That's a weird thing to spring on me all of a sudden but I guess I would like to be stronger at pyromancy. Maybe. I'm not sure. I want to unravel the mysteries of life and pyromancy is the way to do that. I guess I wish I had more time. Bond level 1. Master, glad to be of help. Bond level 2. You know, there's this thing I recently found out, VTuber. It's actually never mind. Bond level 3. You know, I would like to take you on a visit to the Great Swamp. I know it's impossible but it really is the sort of place someone should visit. I know the name sounds odd to non-pyromancers but really, it's a nice place. Bond level 4. So I've been reading more of those little books you lent me, the ones with the picture. They're actually really addicting. Bond level 5. I'm really sorry that you can't handle pyromancy. It might have made Carmina a bit jealous but I would have loved you as a student. Well, I would say that I can teach you wisdom but I'm not all that wise really, actually I'm a bit of a clumsy fool. Anyway, if you ever need someone to speak with I'll do my best to be there. Whatever you need. Birthday. Happy birthday. We normally celebrated this in the Great Swamp by, actually I don't think we're allowed to do that here. Too many flammable things nearby. During an event. A lot of noise outside. Do you think we should have a look? I hope it's somewhere natural at least. First ascension. Oh, I feel a little stronger and my clothes are a little different. Hey, I could have sworn I had a hood for this outfit as well. Second ascension. Now I'm in completely different clothes than before. What happened to all my furs? Can I have my furs back? Third ascension. Can you stop changing my clothes please? Is this the last one? Am I alright now? Fourth ascension. Hey wait. I'm back to how I started, thanks for that. I'm also stronger than before. Well, that's alright, but I'm just happy to have my furs back. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 92, By the Bonfire, 12. By the Bonfire, Twisted Mind. The Chaldean staff, what few remained alive, steered clear of him as he wandered through the hallways. He took special care to avoid senseless interactions with the servants here and they seemed to take notice of his aversion to them and steer clear as well. He could feel their judging looks out of the corner of their eyes though. It wasn't like he had made an effort to hide it, however he had a specific intention in mind as he marched towards his specific target location. His pace remained at a steady walk, neither seemed to be in a rush nor dawdling in the hallways needlessly. He was moving at a perfectly acceptable pace as he approached the entrance to the room. Rumors had been circulating since his arrival, a few choice whispers here and there and mentions of a previous singularity on the ocean eventually reached his ears. He cared nothing for some relic which could bleach the world if some lordkin was sacrificed to it. It frankly seemed to be a waste of good resources. He was more puzzled as to why it was even something that existed in the first place. Unless it was for when the world became the equivalent of Oriental. He supposed that was a time when it would be acceptable to reduce the world to nothing. What purpose did a land of no hope truly serve? No, his interest lay with something else. Talk of a second Grail they had recovered, however this one was different to the others. Something which had been summoned in much the same way as this, Ark. What little information he had overheard had them refer to it as a divine bond, but the imagery was similar to something he had once read in the archives of Lothric when studying the history of the flame. A relic which dated back to the first age of fire and was lost to time as the ages went on. If they truly had discovered the Lord Vessel, then it was hardly something he could overlook. His shadow fell upon the door, his wooden hand rose up towards the metallic entrance before he tapped his knuckles 3 times against the surface, producing a pultile knock. He remained silent for a few moments as he awaited a response of any sort. Eventually he heard the hiss of the door and watched as it rose up into the frame. Da Vinci stepped out and promptly blinked as she stared at her arrival, raising a single eyebrow at the servant in clear surprise at his presence. "Can I help you with something?" she eventually asked. Sullivan tilted his head slightly. Does the concept of wishing someone a good morning not translate between worlds? He asked with a hidden smirk. Da Vinci rolled her eyes back. "Ah yes, where are my manners?" She tapped herself on the forehead before giving an exaggerated smile. "Buongiorno." Her voice was equally exaggerated before her expression cooled down into a casual one. "Now what can I help you with, Sullivan?" "HMPH." He grunted, then leaned over her and peered into the room. "Rumor has it you have come into the possession of a Lord Vessel," he idly remarked as he continued to scan the room. He paused when Da Vinci stood on her tiptoes and blocked off his view with an unimpressed expression. "Does the concept of privacy not translate between worlds?" Sullivan responded with a simple huff and leaned backwards. "Amusing." He drawled out, "A Lord Vessel, do you have one?" She narrowed her eyes slightly, then leaned back and crossed her arms in front of her chest. "Maybe, why?" "A relic from the first age of fire that has been lost to time for an era uncountable shows up." His smile went unseen but not unheard. "And you don't think that might attract some harmless curiosity?" "Oh no. I am fully aware that most of what I do in my workshop attracts harmless curiosity." Da Vinci smiled and flicked her hair back. "I am a genius after all." Her smile died, "But I have sneaking suspicions that your curiosity is far from harmless." "And what has led you to this conclusion?" Sullivan amusedly asked. "I have been summoned, in much the same way as yourself, to lend my assistance to Chaldea." Giving a small shrug, he leaned back and spread his arms wide. "I am simply here to lend my expertise." "Aha." She gave him a flat look in response, prompting him to scoff and lower his arms. "Whatever else you seem to believe, I should point out that our last encounter involved my aiding your group of disorganized thugs and woodland witches on a hunt across a continent to ensure a madman didn't flood the world with a primordial force of destruction." Scoffing, he gestured to himself. "I have yet to do anything to earn any level of suspicion or ill treatment. And yet everyone else who has ever met you has said such colorful things." Da Vinci smiled back, "Namely about your lovely treatment of the innocent." "Please." Sullivan scoffed, "The innocent? You must be joking. They were enablers and delusional fools and the world is better off without them in it." Crossing his arms, his face creaked in a semblance of a raised eyebrow. "Besides, do you think my actions of ensuring the survival of the world are any different from those knights in the floors above who presumably killed just as many on the battlefield in the same of some glorious kingdom?" He paused. "Or do you perhaps refer to Havel, who participated in the near genocide of an entire race of beings?" Da Vinci held up her hand while the other pinched the bridge of her nose. "Let's not get into ethical debates as to whether one mode of killing is comparable to another. We'll be here all day otherwise." She looked back at him. "So you want to help?" "That is the sole purpose for my being here, else I would not have answered the call for summoning." Sullivan replied in a tone of faint irritation. unless you have another sorcerer who studied the magic of the gods hiding somewhere in Chaldea, and I doubt in his current pseudo-hollow state that the exiled Bishop Havel is of any use to you." Staring at him for a few moments longer, Da Vinci eventually let out an exasperated sigh and turned around, raising her hand and beckoning the pontiff into the room. "Just be sure not to touch anything, a lot of my projects are delicate." "Is that treatment reserved purely for myself?" "No," she answered quickly, "I would ask the same of all visitors, if only because I would rather place the safety of my own projects in my own hands." Sullivan hummed in amusement at her statement. "You trust no one else with your work but yourself, is it?" Nodding his head, he took a single step into the room. "I can respect that way of thinking. I would behave much the same if someone were to step inside my own private study. I understand one of the old rooms has been cleared out for you in regards to that." The genius idly commented as she walked towards the center of the room and the table where the Lord Vessel was resting. "Yes, however a study without anything to research is rather pointless," he replied, gazing around the room with his eyeless face. "I suppose I shall simply have to wait until something emerges where my help is." He trailed off, coming to a stop near one of the work benches and stared at one of the papers on the desk. His brows creaked as they furrowed in interest before he reached out and straightened the paper. "Oi!" Da Vinci called out, earning his attention and drawing it away from the schematics. "No sneaking a peek at my projects. You'll ruin the big reveal." "Your projects?" he parroted before looking back towards the paper and giving it a more discerning eye. "It holds remarkable likeness to a wyvern, and yet—" He paused, looking down at the notes lining the design even as Da Vinci rolled her eyes at his blatant decision to ignore her request. "This is a transportation for flight," he voiced aloud. The genius felt some sense of satisfaction at the way his voice took on a slight hint of awe. "Only a single-seater." The woman crossed her arms and leaned back with a smirk. "And that's just with what materials I have on hand. I'm sure I could make something better with enough time." She straightened out her expression. "Now stop looking through oi," she called out again as he gently moved the papers to one side and looked through the others. "A self-powered cart." His voice became more amazed as his head moved from one to another. "And this, a boat which grows once it touches water." "Huh." Da Vinci blinked. "Oh, that's just an inflatable raft." She waved her hand. "It's impressive but not quite as good as you're making it out to be." "I disagree, these ideas," he muttered out, then looked towards her. "They're all so new." He spoke with that tone still filled with awe before he shook his head. "The Lord Vessel. Amazed by my ideas are you?" Da Vinci teased with a grin. She could feel Sullivan deadpan at her. "Oh, don't be like that." She placed a hand on her chest and smiled wider. "It's only natural to be awed in the presence of a genius." "At the very least, your boasts have merit," Sullivan muttered, then looked back at the schematics and made sure to gently return them to their original order. "I wonder if there was ever one like you in the world of fire?" he quietly asked before he shook his head. "No, I suspect there wasn't. There's only one universal genius," Da Vinci boasted, "and you're looking at her." Sullivan merely hummed in response as he stared at the designs for a few moments longer. "The skies were always seen as the domain of the dragons," he spoke after a few moments. "Only those who rode upon wyverns ever reached such places, and they were few and far between, even in Lothric. As interesting as dragon riding is." Da Vinci shrugged. "I prefer to build my own transportation." She paused. "If only to show that I can." Grunting, Sullivan shook his head. "Yes, if only to show you can." He let out a long breath before turning back to the Lord Vessel. "Now then, this is a container designed to hold the power of Lord Souls." "Yes, we devised as much." Da Vinci's tone and posture shifted to something equivalent to work mode, as she leaned over the table and stared at it. "It works in a similar fashion to the Holy Grail in that it is designed to hold large quantities of magical energy." Sullivan nodded. "Yes, but these were to be the souls of lords. No ordinary metal would suffice." He moved to the table. "During my time in the grand libraries of Orlando, much of the information described it as both the greatest and final work of Trahyarn before his death." He reached out and tapped the rim of the basin. "The titanite used is the purest quality that has ever been used by the gods, infused with the strength of the smith god's own soul as well, or so the archives tell you." Are they reliable? They were meticulous. Sullivan replied, as the only source of information which remained untouched by the cycles, they were the greatest reservoir of knowledge to be found in any land. The building itself was under the same manner of spell as the bottomless boxes. Da Vinci blinked, bigger on the inside then. She hummed as Sullivan nodded. I've been able to determine that they touched upon some form of spatial alteration, shifting the volume of the interior to be greater than the exterior, however I haven't worked out how the weight was dealt with. It's a localized breach into a differing plane of existence. Sullivan explained, I suppose an example would be the painted worlds being a different world altogether, but I myself rarely had the motivation to study my old home. The grimace was audible. Regardless, the space within the bottomless box shifted in accordance with what was placed within it. Da Vinci tilted her head, shifted. Akin to filling up a waterskin. Sullivan explained, the bag expands as water is poured into it, however unlike the waterskin it will continually expand. You're simply causing the boundary of the dimensional pocket to expand as it fills it. She hummed, I see, quite clever. You were saying. Ah, yes. Sullivan nodded. A normal vessel of titanite was ill-suited to contain the power of a lord's soul, even one which had been split as Gwyn's had. Most suspect that his infusion of his own soul is what led to Trahiarn's death. That aside, the Lord vessel could hold the strength of the Lord souls of every ancient ruler, with the notable exception of one. Sullivan nodded. However, whether the dark soul was a Lord soul to begin with or just a product of humanity is not something I ever discovered. He let out a hollow laugh. The gods were apparently unwilling to discuss the origins of humanity within their grand archives. That aside, this will hold a tremendous deal of magical energy within it that far exceeds that of your, he gestured towards her, Holy Grails. We figured as much as well. Da Vinci nodded. Apparently it could also be used to transport between bonfires. Sullivan stared at her in silence for a few moments. That was one of its recorded uses. Yes, the bonfires were avatars of the first flame and the Lord vessel was supposed to be used to grant access to the site where the flame manifested at the dawn of time, so it is understandable it would be linked with the bonfires in some way. Can it be used outside of that purpose? Transportation between bonfires became possible without it. Sullivan admitted, they are anchor points in the world, centered upon ley lines. He turned to the woman. The spellwork lay within the bonfires themselves, and creating one requires something we lack. The first flame. Da Vinci clicked her tongue. That sounds like a predicament. I would phrase it as a blessing. Sullivan remarked. However, transportation spells were not unusual. Princes Lothric and Lorien were both skilled in the art, however theirs was more short range. I was thinking of something from Chaldea to the Singularity once a connection had been established. Da Vinci remarked, I've already been modifying the summoning stones for a connection. Ah yes, that would work. Sullivan nodded. From what I understand, the Singularities, or points in time experiencing distortion from the regular flow of history. An ideal location for the summoning stones to perform. The connection was stable, but it only lasted a few minutes. They were only designed to last until the heir of fire or host of embers had been slain. Sullivan shrugged. Such an individual was usually the focus of the summoning, and without it they were no longer needed. True, but it wouldn't do for a servant to vanish in the middle of a fight. No, that would be unfortunate. The pontiff rumbled in agreement. The summoning stones linked themselves to the host of embers in the event of an invasion or a call for aid. They would remain as long as the anchor point remained active. In this case, that would be Fujimaru. But he is already supporting servants within the actual summoning. Sullivan nodded, then paused and stared at the Lord vessel. How were you able to power the summonings the first time around? I used the Chaldean generator as the anchor point, but I didn't want to risk overloading it. The genius admitted, we're already running with less power than we'd like, and even with the Holy Grails to act as a battery, I don't want to risk overloading and destroying one of the generators when we don't have the parts to repair it. As you say, Sullivan nodded. Perhaps using the Lord vessel as an anchor. That would require you to take it into the Singularity. Da Vinci pointed out, if what you said was true. Yes, but I was able to modify the summoning crystals for communication, provided a receiving crystal was present. The pontiff explained, if he were to have a summoning crystal, All he would need do is have it in his possession and call down the servant he needed. He pointed at the Lord Vessel. We could offset the magical cost by utilizing the power which remains within this, or any one of the other Holy Grails you have recovered. Da Vinci blinked, then slowly nodded her head. It could work, but that doesn't change the time requirements. The summoning system is still much shorter than what we would prefer. From my understanding, the Holy Grail within the Singularity is the focal point of the temporal distortion. At her nod, he continued on. In that case, we would classify it as the equivalent of a host of embers, and until it was recovered the summoning would remain stable. She nodded, and the durability of the summons. It was a calling of spirits from across time. However, the spirits themselves were only partially stabilized within the world, which is why they required an anchor point. Even then, they would experience some manner of restriction upon them. Like shadow servants, Da Vinci murmured. Still, the ability to summon a servant, even if weakened, at any given moment is certainly something not to be overlooked. There were other restrictions. Sullivan pointed out. The summons usually could not stray far from the host, perhaps less than 100 meters or so. Not good for scouting, but good if you're in a pinch. Da Vinci muttered out. Anything else? He would still need their name. Sullivan pointed out. It is a call across worlds, and one he himself cannot make. It must be a voluntary action, and red-eye orbs will not suffice. He warned, else your servants will be unable to leave until they slay the boy or are killed. Charming. Da Vinci muttered, so we need some sort of tablet for him to use where he can call servants with. The woman cupped her chin, some manner of summoning program where he can just open up a list and click on whichever servant he needs at a time. Again, a summoner could only call upon 2 spirits to aid him. He paused. Whether or not you can achieve more than that, I do not know. 2 sounds like plenty. The woman replied, and I already have some ideas. She chuckled, rubbing her hands together. Yes, some ideas indeed. Sullivan grunted and leaned back. In any event, you seem more knowledgeable about the Lord Vessel than I would have assumed. His face creaked into a frown. I doubt the unkindled was very informative, considering this had been destroyed in ages before he was likely ever born. Da Vinci remained silent as Sullivan stared at her. So, I have to wonder who had the intellect to speak of this to you. I suppose Havel is a likely candidate. He muttered, although he was exiled following the occult rebellions, and the Lord Vessel came into existence shortly before the fall of Izalith. So he is no longer a candidate. You seem to already have your answer. I know, what I don't have is the motive. He growled, why is Gwyndolin here? She shrugged, I'm not sure. For the same reason as the other servants, I assume. Don't be stupid. Sullivan cut her off. Gwyndolin cares not one iota for humans or the world of man. He's a god, and if there is one thing that has proven true throughout all of history, it is that the gods care nothing for the woes of man. Well, I can't speak about his reason for being here. Da Vinci shrugged her shoulders and looked back at the Lord Vessel. He hasn't spoken much to anyone, although he informed me on some of the Lord Vessel's characteristics, so he has at least proven helpful. And he asked for nothing in return. No tribute. No demands for thanks. Nope. Sullivan frowned, turning away from her and swiftly departing the room. The genius watched him leave before she sighed and shook her head. Never a boring moment around here. I probably should inform someone about that though. It's cold outside. Terribly cold. It's always cold though. It's always cold, and it's always lonely. Child, where have you gone to now? His head turns as his mother's voice drifts through the icy winds. Turning towards the voice, he can hear her calls turn more desperate. Child, it's awfully cold out, come back. He takes a deep breath and walks back through the snow. It bites at his skin. So cold it burns him, every step feels like agony. The icy chill which clings to his body and never leaves. He can't remember the last time he ever, or if he ever, touched anything warm. Warm. What is warmth? He's heard about it, but it's about fire. Mustn't think about fire. Fire is bad, mother always said so. Fire is evil, but he doesn't know what evil is. Mother does though. Evil is everything that isn't here. But, does that mean that there is a place that isn't here? Mother never answers that part. There's always been here. All that is present is here. There's never been anything but here. So, why does he know what the cold is? Shouldn't he be like the others? He can feel his sight drift to the husks as he drags himself through the snow. It takes effort as his legs sink to the knees with every step. The husks don't mind. However, he's smaller than they are. He's a sapling and Mother calls them undead but doesn't say anything more. Those figures look more like him than Mother does, but Mother never talks about it. Those figures dressed in dark clothing with the pointed metal helms. They carry fire. But Mother says fire is bad and evil. Does that make them evil? But the evil men never once look at him, they just wander without any purpose. Everyone is like that. No one speaks to him except Mother. And Sister Fried. Sister Fried says fire is evil too. That all they need is the cold, and the cold is the only thing that will ever keep them safe. He doesn't like the cold. But he doesn't want to tell them that, because they like the cold. The cold is good and he doesn't want to be seen as evil. He's a good boy. He'll get used to the cold. He doesn't want to be evil. He doesn't want to be evil. He winces as he feels another chill bite at his skin. A strong breeze pushes him over. The snow wraps around his body as he falls forwards. It hurts, but he doesn't want to scream out. If he screams out, they'll know he doesn't like the cold. He holds in his scream, pushing himself back up and staring at his arms. He can see the cold clinging to them. His skin has turned hard, the specks of green on his body are withering away. Mother says that's normal for saplings like him. All their green will eventually die. It hurts. The cold hurts, but he won't complain. He pushes onwards, ignoring the pain in his body as he continues his advance. It's the same journey every single day. He always travels through the woods and past the wolves to the cliff. He's done it since he could learn to walk. He wants to go beyond the cliffs, but he's not allowed yet. When he's bigger, at least that's what his mother says. He stops. Something else is new. He remembers every single person in this journey. They all remain the same. 10 wolves and 15 of the pointy men. They've remained that way ever since he started this journey. So, who is this man with the strange cloak on his head? It's a different color to the others, brighter than theirs but different. His attire is different too, with a long wisp of white hair coming down his face. He's new. The man walks through as if searching for something. He pauses and turns in the direction of the boy. A child. His voice croaks. It's old, much older than Mother's. I wonder, what did you lose to come here? There's something in the old voice. The armored figure turns to him. He takes a step back, causing the old voice to pause. Fear not, child, I am not here to bring harm to you. The old voice calls out. It's caring, it's like Mother's but different. Truth. He doesn't know how he knows it, but the old voice doesn't mean him harm. He stops, staring back at the old voice. The old voice hums, best be on your way, boy, it's cold out here, it would not do for you to succumb to this chill. The old voice pauses, as if staring closer. You are not lost, are you? No. He calls back, his voice shakes, although whether that's from the cold or fear he can't tell. Good. The old voice croaks back, turning away from him and wandering back into the blizzard. He almost doesn't want the old voice to go. He's new, he doesn't want this to slip through his fingers. The old voice is new. Child. His mother's wails cut through the air and drag his attention back towards the direction of his home. He looks between the two of them. The old voice has vanished into the blizzard. But he wants to follow the voice. He lets out a shaky breath, turning towards the cries of his mother and beginning his trek up the hill. He can find the old voice tomorrow. He pauses, a sense of purpose fills him. He has something to do tomorrow. The thought excites him that for just a moment, just a brief moment, he forgets about the chill in the air. He climbs to the top of the hill. He can see his mother in the distance. Her body turns towards him with her branch-like arms extended out as if to embrace him. There you are, child. Her voice contains relief. He approaches her as she stares down. I'm glad you're safe. Truth. Her arms lean down, entangling around his body and drawing him into a hug. I'm fine, Mother. He responds back with as much affection as he can muster for her. He hasn't the heart to tell her that her hugs hurt. He can feel her limbs dig into his barky skin already peeling from time in the cold. Thank goodness, she whispers, I'm nothing without you. Lie. He spent much of his time wandering the halls of Chaldea, taking special care to avoid the areas which he knew Havel frequented, without much in the way of success. The pontiff eventually came to a halt in the hallway, letting out an annoyed growl before continuing on his way. Who would have thought that finding the god would prove so irritable? He continued to wander the hallway until he came upon another junction. He knew for a fact that the right one led towards the simulator, the left one led to the biwa. He mechanically turned his head towards the noise, finding himself staring down at a boy with bright pink hair wearing some manner of knightly armor staring up at him with wide surprised eyes. Whoa! He pointed at them. Were you also cursed to become a tree as well? He asked with an excited expression. Same. He moved closer and grabbed his arms, shaking him lightly. I spent some time trapped as a tree as well. Trust me, it was very boring, but then it got a little peaceful, then back to be boring and then back to unhand me. Sullivan growled as he pulled his arms free and stepped away from the eccentric servant. What is wrong with? Ah, right. The boy tapped himself on the forehead. No introductions from me. How rude. I am Astolfo, one of the paladins of Charlemagne and the cutest servant in Chaldea. He spread his arms wide, grinning from ear to ear. Pontiff Sullivan. He replied slowly, what is? Whoa, you're a tree pope. That's awesome. He laughed. Oh. What type of religion do the trees have? Because I never asked the trees when I was alive if they had a religion even when I was trapped as one, which really seems odd. I'm not a tree. I'm a spirit. Ah, a fi. That makes a lot more sense. Astolfo nodded his head, although now I'm wondering if trees do have religions or not. Ah, well. So, he paused, then narrowed his eyes at the pontiff. Wait a second, you feel like a bad dude. What? A bad guy? Astolfo pointed an accusing finger at him, like the sort who does a lot of shady stuff. No offense, but you've even got the look nailed down for a generic villain. Sullivan stared at him in silence. Trust me, I've got a nose for this sort of thing. Astolfo grinned as he tapped the sensory organ for reference, although Bradamant was way better at that sort of thing, but let me guess, you're a caster. Nope. Don't bother answering, I already know. Call it a gut feeling or something, and hey. Don't walk away, we were just getting started, and hey. Don't speed up. So then that ended up with Roland stripping down to nothing and sprinting around the countryside. Astolfo rattled on without showing any signs of stopping. Sullivan glared at the boy out of the corner of his eye, briefly considering if he could get away with killing him. Then there was what started it all, my journey to the moon to save Orlando's brain. Now that was a story and a half, let me tell you. Shut up. Sullivan growled out, turning to the boy. What do you want and why are you following me? Huh. Astolfo blinked, then scratched his head. I think I was meant to do something about you, but I can't remember what. I think it involved Linny. Linny. Sullivan frowned. What sort of name is Linny? Guiani. Was that it? No, Gwynline. Gwyndolin. Sullivan corrected him, raising an eyebrow. Your mission came in regards to Gwyndolin. Yeah, I was supposed to keep you away from the library to avoid causing the boy trailed off as he realized what he said. Oops. Don't suppose you could forget that. Quite the contrary. Sullivan span on his heel and moved back through the hallways. You have been most helpful. Astolfo remained behind, cringing as he watched the spirit wander through the hallways in the direction of the elevator which would take him to the same floor as the library. Oops. The paladin bit his lip before scratching his head. Who was I supposed to call if this happened again? He paused before shrugging. I'm sure Master will know. He spoke aloud, skipping through the hallway in the opposite direction. Gwyndolin skipped through another page in silence. The god could feel Medusa occasionally glance at him out of the corner of his eyes. If he was being honest, being in the same room as her right now was more than a little uncomfortable. In fact, being in the same room as anyone who had seen that display was downright agonizing. Something he would rather erase from the minds of everyone present. What was worse was when he caught them staring at him with a look of pity. That was something he absolutely didn't want nor desire in any way, shape or form. He was a child of Gwyn. He should have won that match, and instead he was treated like some common silver knight. No, it was worse than that. Then there was the matter of being humiliated in front of the exile and the deserter Flan. Apparently in whichever life he lived, he was forever destined to be the object of suffering. He was more used to that than he imagined, however. He paused in his reading as a familiar feeling flooded across his body. His heightened senses picked up the approach of a servant. One who was making absolutely no effort to cloak themselves. Not that Gwyndolin imagined they would want to. He already knew which servant was approaching. He had long since been expecting this since he learned they had also been summoned. He supposed they must only just have been made aware of his presence here, otherwise they would have come earlier. Closing his book shut with a gentle thump, he placed it on the table at his side before he rested his hands upon his lap and fixed his attention straight onwards. Not bothering to look towards the door, even as he heard it hiss open and the footsteps of his visitor closed in. He saw Medusa look up from her book and tracked something moving across the room towards him. He felt the presence come to a halt behind him, which was corroborated by Medusa seemingly staring at something behind him. "I suspect thee would wish to depart, Lady Medusa." Gwyndolin spoke out in a calm, perhaps subtly amused voice, as he still did not turn around, "for this will likely disturb thy reading." The woman continued to stare at the pair in silence before a gentle sigh escaped her and she rose to her feet. "Don't start a fight in here," she warned the pair, "Master will be displeased." Gwyndolin merely hummed in response, prompting the former goddess to stare at the individual behind him before she shook her head and walked towards the door, not before placing her book upon one of the coffee tables. The door once again hissed open before shutting behind her with a thud which may as well have been a roar. "I was beginning to wonder what kept you," Gwyndolin began, looking down at his hands. "You always were punctual, although perhaps you were simply afraid to stand before your better once again." "Prince Gwyndolin," Sullivan replied as he stepped around from behind the god, moving into his field of vision and staring down at him. "Well, I suppose the title of prince might be in limbo," the pontiff continued on with a hint of venomous amusement, "considering the result of your unfortunate encounter with your lunar counterpart." Gwyndolin's eyebrows twitched behind his helm. "Still, I assume if your family were still alive they would be quite pleased they finally had the princess of the night they longed for." He chortled on, stepping towards the seat Medusa had been sitting in and placing himself down within it, directly opposite the god. "So a victory of some variety." "Ah, Sullivan," Gwyndolin mused with an utterly hollow smile, "that biting wit of yours remains as sharp as ever." "I recall my wit was quite popular among the knights," he replied with a smug voice. "They were quite taken with my humor." "Yes. Perhaps you missed your true calling as a jester." HM. Sullivan rumbled a low chuckle. "How generous of you to offer advice to my career. I'm glad you found my personality so warm as to even think of me as an entertainer to the masses. I suppose most insects are capable of surviving in the strangest of environments." Gwyndolin remarked before he assumed an expression of faux realization. "It also occurs to me that mold is also a hardy form of life. Perhaps you did have relatives back in Orlando, in the damp corners of the wine cellar. Perhaps it was not me who missed his true calling as a jester." Sullivan remarked, "I imagine the role would have suited you better than that of a ruler. Your deformity would have served you well, perhaps your legs might have been able to juggle for the children. I've read that traveling circus acts used to have a wide variety of animals. You have the advantage that your pet beasts are always with you." Such sincere praise, Gwyndolin smiled back, even as his snake legs hissed towards the pontiff. "I try." Sullivan chuckled in response. "Still, you appear to have made yourself at home here, secluded away in some dark corner and out of the sight of everyone else." He mused as he scanned his surroundings. "How fitting. We all seem to fall back onto what brings us comfort. Yes, such as worms using their wiles to infiltrate their betters." Gwyndolin replied back, "I suppose this is better suited for you as well, given your past experience of espionage." "Hardly an achievement," Sullivan remarked with a shrug. "Between your apathy and the delusional belief of the others that no one would dare to question the mighty words of the gods, it was simple to infiltrate your ranks and easier still to deal with you. You have always been talented at dancing around the true goal, Sullivan." Gwyndolin looked towards him. "So, just this once, as proof of my magnanimity, I shall answer whatever question you have with complete honesty." Really? Sullivan gave an incredulous scoff. It is hardly a surprise my word might be worth more than a base cur like yourself. Gwyndolin smiled back at him. I am a god, after all. In much the same way the runt of the litter is still a wolf, perhaps. Sullivan bit back before he leaned into his chair, but I shall humor you. Why are you here? Why? Gwyndolin tilted his head ever so innocently. What do you mean? I am here for the same reason the other servants are present. Called forth to lend our hand for the survival of humanity. Don't. Sullivan cut him off sharply. Don't think to mock me with that pitiful act. You couldn't deceive me on your best day and those have long since passed you by. Then I confess. Gwyndolin raised his hands while his lip danced with a knowing smile. I have not the knowledge of what you refer to. You don't care in any way about the survival of humanity. Sullivan spat. You and your entire accursed bloodline, all your fanatical cultists and sympathizers. You all thought of humans as nothing more than servants to your grand and glorious fire. More than willing to doom them just so long as your little campfire kept sputtering on. Is this where you confess your undying love for humans, Sullivan? Gwyndolin mocked, earning a growl from the pontiff. I couldn't care either way. He snapped back, but what I cared about, more than anything else, was the world logic. Everything that begins, must end in you. You all trod upon that basic fact with the belief you were somehow greater than the most basic principle of the planet. He stabbed a finger at the god. With arrogance incomprehensible, you would drown the world in stagnation and ruin, just so you could claim you were still at the top of the wastes. Gwyndolin leaned back into his chair further, tilting his head in obvious boredom at the rant. I devoted everything to undo your damage. Sullivan went on. It was my life's work. I crawled out of their infernal frozen pit of desolation to a new world on the verge of the same. I spent every moment I could planning to drag the world forwards into the next age, so we could reach this moment. Where we are both dead. No. Sullivan snapped. Where something new could emerge. That woman in the study has plans that I could never dream of, a sense of fresh perspective untainted by the influence of you or your fire. He laid his hand back on his armrest. And you think you can come here and just fight for everything you stood against for ages? Gwyndolin let out a tired breath as Sullivan continued on. You think that upholding world logic is some mere hobby? That you might just take up the goal as if it doesn't fly in the face of everything you believe? He growled out and leaned forwards. So why? Why are you here? Where does this arrogance of yours birth itself that you think you can just steal away what I have nothing left because of you. Gwyndolin cut him off, similarly leaning forwards in his chair. Everything I worked for. Everything I believed in for, he shrugged, who knows how many hundreds of thousands of years anymore. All rendered nothing because of you. Anor Londo was my life. He admitted, without it, I am nothing. The god's lip twitched slightly, so when I was summoned back to life, I had nothing to use to push myself onwards. I just considered ending it and returning to the nothing from whence I came, until you showed up at the island. His smile turned sharp. Bitter. I truly thought about killing you, then and there and being done with it, but that isn't revenge, Sullivan. You hadn't lost everything yet. Sullivan stared back at him in silence. I knew there would have to be something that motivated you. The distortion in history was proof enough that there was indeed something wrong with the world. A cold chuckle parted from his lips, but when I heard that all of humanity had been burned away to nothing. That was indeed something that birthed an idea in my mind. He slowly rose from his chair. You were right. I don't care about humans. Whether they live or die is really no concern of mine. I know you don't really care about them either, but what you care about, more than anything, is the world logic. He stared down at Sullivan. And before I knew it, the perfect revenge fell right into my hands without me even needing to do anything. He leaned down, because it's hardly a natural passing for them all to be burned away in an instant. Not when there is still so much possibility within them, these petty little creatures. So I knew that if you were summoned, you'd devote your life to seeing them restored, if only to fulfill your desire this time. So what is it you intend to do? Sullivan asked quietly, then gave an amused huff. Kill the boy. Prevent them from restoring humanity. What? Gwyndolin blinked at him behind his helm, then shook his head. Oh no, Sullivan. I'm not going to kill him. He leaned down to the pontiff, his voice dropping into a whisper, I'm going to help him. Quote. What? Yes. I'm going to help them restore their humanity. He leaned back, smiling venomously. I'm going to ensure that their world logic is upheld and they continue on with their petty little lives, and do you know why? Quote. I'm going to do it, just to overshadow you. Gwyndolin's smile vanished. Everything you think of achieving, I will do better. Everything you try to accomplish, I will do it first. Any aid you try to provide, I will have already given freely. Not because I care for these humans in any way, he shrugged, but just so you can't. Quote. Do you understand, Sullivan? I'm going to steal your reason for living, piece by piece until you have nothing left for you. I'm going to fulfill your dream for you. I'm going to make sure that your name is nothing more than a footnote by the time this story reaches its conclusion. The actions, the second life of Sullivan, will amount to nothing. Turning away from Sullivan, he slowly made his way towards the door. That is my revenge, Sullivan. I will leave you, just as you left me. With nothing left to your name but word of mouth passed by those who remain behind, if they ever think to remember you. You should relax, Sullivan. Gwendolyn called back to him as the door opened up, the god turning around to stare at the pontiff as he remained seated in his chair. I'm going to fulfill that request you made so long ago. I'm going to save the world. So you should smile at least, you're finally going to get your wish. The door closed behind him, leaving the pontiff alone in the room with no one but himself. Sullivan's head thudded against the back of his chair as he rested against it, staring blankly at the room.